Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. In today's episode, we are discussing about environment and development. Joining us today is Mr. David Kennett, an environmental researcher based in Australia. Please allow me to welcome him. Welcome to the show, Mr. Kennett.
Thank you for inviting me here. Much appreciated.
How have you been?
I've been very, very nervous. This is my second visit to Nepal, but I'm just so excited. But it's for an Australian, it is such a different country, and there's so much for me to learn here. But I just find the people of Nepal are just so wonderfully welcoming. Everybody I come across is just so nice.
So this is your second time here in Nepal, and you have been extensively, working in the areas of research, focusing on environment, agriculture, and forestry. How do you see the state of global environmental challenges?
Well, there are so many challenges for us in regard to the environment. There's been so much clearing of land for agriculture, and there's been so much pressure put on people to produce food as cheaply as possible, and they're all producing food as monocultures, and this is not really a natural way of doing it. But we've been pressured mainly by large multinational companies that are wanting to sell their commodities to us in the form of fertilizers and things like that. And what I've discovered is that nature has some really exciting, I can't think of the quite word, secrets, if you like, that we need to understand. And once we understand this, we can work with nature instead of fighting nature. Everybody wants to kill weeds, but weeds are wonderful plants. They put nutrients into the ground. And so we can help the rural communities to improve their standard of living, increase income, because particularly in a country like Nepal, where you've got these isolated communities, they don't want to be importing food from other countries or even from large distances within Nepal. If they can produce the food more effectively for themselves, that is wonderful.
Why so happening? What is the level of awareness among people who produce agricultural productions? Are they not getting a market, or they are thinking the way they want to have a lot of income at a time? What are the issues that can be addressed at the research level?
Well, it's I'm discovering that my main aim originally was with forestry, and I have discovered that one can improve the rate of growth dramatically. Normally when trees are planted, for argument's sake, with a machine where you just go across a paddock, bump, bump, bump like this, and you plant 3,000 trees a day, about 2% of the trees perform significantly better. And everybody says, why? And they think it is genetics, but it's not genetics. It is nature has a system set up which just hasn't been recognized by scientists. And it's a grid pattern within the Earth's magnetic field. And there's particular points to which particular trees are tuned into, if you like. And if you plant the tree in exactly the right place, after 20 years, for argument's sake, trees in my part of Australia will be that size, about 2% will be this size, whereas the majority are just that size. And so to address climate change, this is very important. If you can make 100% of the trees grow this big, they are sequestering more carbon from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and they're addressing climate change. And they're also transpiring more moisture into the atmosphere. So as they've cleared forests, rainfall throughout the world has reduced. And so by getting these trees to act as bigger pumps, putting more moisture into the atmosphere will increase the rainfall. And 90% of Australia and 70% of the world's landmass is arid or semi-arid. And people think we can't grow trees there, but we can. We can grow trees in the Sahara Desert if we use the right methods.
How do you see the state of agricultural productivity in the countries like Nepal? You have been traveling to many countries around and engaged in research to agricultural productivity as well.
Right. Well, here I notice that the farmers have small plots of land, and in Australia, typically a farming property might be 10,000 hectares, 20,000 hectares, and they use enormous machines, and they just produce mostly wheat or barley, and there's no diversity, and all these crops just the soils where I am in Western Australia are among the most nutrient deficient soils on the planet, and so they just require the soil is purely there to support the plants. All the energy that goes into it to make the plant grow is all artificial, and unfortunately not all the elements that plants require are actually included in the artificial fertilizers that are made. There are many elements that plants need just in microscopic amounts, and these can be provided naturally by other plants with what they call symbiotic relationships. So one like legumes, beans, peas, etc., harvest nitrogen from the atmosphere. They use what they want and they excrete what into the ground, what other plants will benefit from, and with the legumes it's nitrogen. And I found that we can identify what other elements particular plants put into the ground. Like if you leave a paddock to lay fallow or rest it, is a term used in Australia, the fertility level of the soil improves, and this has been recognized for hundreds of years. So you have a fallow year, and then you get better crops as a result, because all the different weeds are putting in different vital elements for the healthy growth of other plants.
Well, Mr. Kennett, at the beginning you said that there is quite pressure from the multinational companies and companies to the farmers in the name of getting bulk of productions on their hands. Is there any mechanism, or as a researcher, what are your suggestions to the countries or to the multinational companies that they would not put pressure on farmers to produce with the bulk of productions, and rather they would start producing with the organic products?
It's very difficult for us as individuals and farmers as individuals to fight these multinational companies that have got so much money. And in India, Monsanto chemicals have pressured so many farmers, and the suicide rate of rural farmers in India has been absolutely terrible, because Monsanto produce Roundup, which is a herbicide to kill all the weeds, and they also produce genetically modified seeds that are resistant to the Roundup. So the idea is you kill all the weeds, and then
suicides due to the trauma.
Say again, sorry?
Why did they suicide in India?
The suicide, I will get to that. Yeah. So they wanted to sell the herbicides and the seeds. Now the seeds they produce are sterile, so farmers normally keep the seed from one crop and then they plant it the next time, and it slowly evolves to be most suitable for their particular land. But Monsanto said, if you use our product, and you have to sign an agreement with them for many, many years to buy their seeds and to buy their herbicides, and they controlled these people. But now, fortunately, legislation is being passed whereby this is being stopped. Monsanto.
Would you call it a forced suicide?
Yeah.
They are compelled.
Yes, terrible.
By these companies.
Yes, and
what is the role of the governments at that time? That may happen in other countries as well.
Well, these companies have got so much money, and every country seems to have corruption, unfortunately. And politicians, I'll give you a very good example. There's certain plants that put boron into the soil. Now, boron is very important for the cellular structure of plants. It's also very important for human beings, for joints and for bones. And anyway, the pharmaceutical companies in America forced the FDA, the federal drug administration companies, to put on borax poison. Now, it is not poison. It is not very pleasant to eat. It is very unpleasant to eat. You wouldn't eat it out wanting to, but it is the most amazing element. And I have a friend who used to have rheumatoid arthritis in all his joints, and I told him, look, you must just take some of this boron every day, and now he's free of his disease. But you tell the researchers, and all the researchers in medicine are controlled by the pharmaceutical companies. They want to sell their expensive drugs. We don't need these expensive drugs. And this is what I call a divining rod, and it's normally people think of it just for looking for water.
This?
Just a piece of wire. Yeah. And This can tell you what elements are missing from your diet or my diet. And so if you're missing magnesium, say, I can ask a personal question of you, are you missing magnesium in your diet? It's saying, no, you've got plenty of magnesium. Are you missing boron? You are actually missing boron. You need boron in your diet. And what I found is fascinating is Himalayan salt, which is predominantly produced in Pakistan, I understand, has got 84 different elements, trace elements, minute amounts, but is really important for our health. And at home, I have a quarter of a teaspoon every morning of Himalayan salt.
Well, Mr. Kennett, this is, I would consider this is the darkest side, Farmers are compelled to suicide. With the contracts they are compelled to sign with multinational companies for years.
That's right.
That is the saddest aspect. Could you also tell us about the links between environmental changes or agriculture products to the process of development and economic growth?
Right. Well, we've seen that the clearing of trees has damaged the environment, so we really need to introduce trees which have commercial value, and I understand that teak trees grow very well in Nepal and they have terrific commercial values. The timber produced from this is fantastic. We want to improve the profitability of the rural farmers who are they struggle in every part of the world, I think. And if we can enhance their income on a very simple basis, which eliminates them having to buy these expensive products, that'll be good. And it's good for the environment as well, because so many of the poisons that are promoted by the pharmaceutical companies and the fertilizer companies are actually poisoning the soil, because it's very difficult to know exactly how much to put on the soil. Because the soil changes regularly across a paddock. So if you're just applying a certain amount of fertilizer per hectare, that is, some areas might have too much, some areas might have too little. But we've just got to find ways that are better for both the environment and also for the farmers.
Well, you are also engaged in, educating children, youths, on diverse issues connected to environmental changes,
yes.
Climate change. Do you think that the new generation is, capable of understanding these so complicated issues?
Yes. Well, since I've come to Nepal last time, I'm just so excited with the youth of Nepal, because my generation, we've been educated, and education is a form of indoctrination. We're told we must do this and we must do that. And to give you an example, everybody in Australia, Western Australia, is told we must plant our trees in wintertime. And so everybody thinks that is what the universities say, this is what all the government departments say, we must plant the trees in wintertime. So I don't think of myself as being particularly intelligent, but we must observe things. So early on, when I first bought my property, I bought it, and we're in the southern hemisphere, so the seasons are different from here. And anyway, so I managed to buy some trees too late as regards what is recommended. Every tree survived. It was absolutely fantastic. The next year I bought trees and planted them at the right time, in the wintertime. Every tree died. And I thought, this is crazy. What is happening here? Why are my trees different from everybody else? And it is absolutely amazing. I planted some trees just before I came to Nepal last year in September. So I planted some of these trees in August in one row, and then the first week of September. The ones that were planted in August, there was a plethora of weeds grow. And everybody thinks that the weeds are bad because they fight for nutrients and moisture. But the main problem with weeds is they actually prevent the sunlight from getting to the trees, and so the trees die. But if just 2 weeks later, from August to September, I plant the other row, no weeds germinate. It's just amazing. There is the seeds have an intelligence, and they know that they have to germinate at a certain time if they are going to be able to procreate. And so if it's August, it's okay, they will germinate, but September they will just September, nature just tells them that it's too late to procreate. The growing season isn't long enough, so the weeds won't be able to. So you plant your trees there, no competition, for nutrients, for moisture, for sunlight, and it's just fantastic. And it's so much cheaper. No herbicides, no chemicals, and because so many of the herbicides also kill the bacteria in the soil. It's so wrong that people have been pushed into doing practices.
But the majority of the farmers in many countries, including Nepal, use it.
Yeah, they've been forced to because they've been indoctrinated. You know, we are told you must use this if you want to make money. You must use this chemical. But we've got to change that. And the children in Nepal. And last time I was teaching children, if they're too young, it's very difficult to teach them. But I found from about 10 years old to 26 years old in the universities, these youngsters understood exactly what I was saying. And the Nepalese people are so spiritual, and this, I reckon, is a connection to God, and we can get answers for anything. If I say, show me yes, it goes right. If I say, show me no, it goes left. And if I want to find the ideal place for a particular tree, or a row of trees, or a row of vegetables, I say, where is the ideal place to plant maize, for argument's sake? And it says, plant it along an energy line which runs there. We can't see these energy lines, but plants are sensitive to these things. And our Australian trees, for argument's sake, because they've evolved to grow in low rainfall regions, they don't like to grow above underground streams. And if they do, they suffer from geopathic stress. And a lot of the eucalyptus trees, when they're over an underground stream, they grow like this and sometimes come right down, and you'll find that there's water flowing just there. And of course, if you want tree for timber, you want a tree that's nice and straight. You don't want timber that's that shape, unless you want to build an arch.
Well, what is your observation about the awareness level of the consumers? Now many institutions and individuals, also researchers, talking about good agricultural practices.
Yes.
It's up to the market whether they have to buy it or not. How can the culture of good agricultural practices be promoted at this moment?
Well, again, it's like education. We've got to indoctrinate people to realize that there are better ways of doing things, and let's all work together. At the moment, it's a struggle between the multinational companies who are only got their shareholders' interest at heart to make money, whereas the people that are at the coalface, they want to obviously being successful in their endeavors as farmers, etc. And so we've got to educate them. And last time I was here, I had the good fortune to go and meet some organic farmers, and they were growing rice in rotation with various vegetables. And I showed them how they could grow the maize, the corn, and the beans that they grow, and the onions they grow, and the cabbages, that they can grow them in a way that they all benefit from each other. It's the plants have got the most amazing society where everyone participates for the benefit of themselves and also for the benefit of everybody, all the other plants as well. And once we can educate people to go back to, this is how plants used to be grown, vegetables used to be grown, and but since for the last 100 years, I suppose, we have just moved away from the traditional methods that were successful, but it wasn't really understood exactly why the methods were successful. But now that I have discovered some of these secrets of nature, we're able to make the old-fashioned methods even more successful, so we can eliminate the need for the herbicides and the fertilizers, and so we can make rural communities much more successful in their food production. And that'll save them so much money, because instead of the people having to import food from far away, which has got considerable cost to it, they can produce their own food more economically and more healthily as well. The food is going to be healthier for them.
Any thoughts on balancing development and environment? There are many projects, hydropower projects, agriculture productions, also that of the construction and infrastructures, and our forest is destroyed. So how can one maintain balance between the process of development and environment?
Yeah, trees are such an important part of the environment. Trees put down very deep roots, and they pump moisture into the atmosphere, and they create rain. So many countries, the rainfall is just declining. And I remember when I was at school 70 years ago, I remember being taught clearing the Amazon forest is reducing the rainfall. We have known about this for so long, but in Australia they still clear all this land for agriculture. If we just put a belt of trees, say 20 metres wide, across paddocks at 400-metre intervals, will benefit in many ways. Basically because we'll be putting more moisture into the atmosphere. Plants, even if you don't get rain, if you put moisture into the atmosphere, when the temperature drops at night, a lot of that moisture condenses on the plants, and the moisture runs down into their roots and provides them with moisture to help them grow and survive. And this is just so natural. But in Australia, everybody wants to produce as much from any area of land, so they cut down trees all the time. But 20 metres wide at 400-metre intervals, it also benefits because they act as windbreak. Now normally when you get a wind blowing, you get desiccation of the soil and the crop. Now the wind blows across and the moisture evaporates away. Whereas if you put the trees there, as I say, it's humidifying the air. It's benefiting the plants. And there was research done in South Australia some years ago, and they call this alley farming. So you plant your rows and then you have an alley in between where you grow your crops. And they found that depending on the height of the trees, the production rate of the sheltered crops could improve anywhere between 5 and 35%. Now that is significant. And if you can then improve the performance of those crops even more, instead of growing a monoculture, by growing a polyculture with the different varieties of plants, you'll improve the performance even more. But to get people in Australia to accept these ideas, it's very difficult. Now, talking about these belts of trees, the government in Australia was promoting this concept some years ago, and they found that these particular trees were putting roots out into the crops, so the crops didn't grow very well near the trees. What I've discovered is that we have a plant called Melaleuca, and if you plant Melaleucas alongside the trees, it stops the roots from going into the crops surrounding it. And so it's a great benefit. And also the Melaleucas are beautiful for birds. Birds will nest in this little plant, so it increases the biodiversity in the environment as well. And it also, because so many of our trees are quite tall, it's introducing, making the windbreak better at lower levels, so you have a diversity of plants within your tree break, windbreak, and they also produce valuable sources of income. Like sandalwood, I think sandalwood is grown over here.
Yes.
And we have a different variety. It's called Santalum spicatum, whereas the Indian one is Santalum alba, and they require hosts to make them grow really well. For argument's sake, I've discovered that in Australia, the sandalwood likes to grow on the south side of an acacia. It doesn't like to grow on the west or the east or the north, but in Australia it likes to grow on the south side. And halfway between the trunk of the tree and the edge of the canopy. And the government has been promoting a particular acacia for many years. It's called Acacia acuminata or jam mottle. When you cut it, it smells like raspberry jam. Mm-hmm. They've been promoting that for years. But the sandalwood grows like this. There is another acacia called mulga, which grows in low rainfall regions, and it is a much denser tree. And when you plant the sandalwood seed in that, it grows straight up. You'd think it would grow to the light, but it doesn't. It grows straight up, and it self-prunes, and so you get a beautiful straight trunk, and it's worth much more money.
Well, Mr. Kennett, you have provided with very minor details of the issues, quite interesting insights, but we are coming to the end of the show.
Okay.
Do you have any final thoughts, any recommendations to the governments of underdeveloped world in relations to policy change in environment and forestry?
Well, I've had the good fortune to meet the Honourable Minister for Forestry here last time I was here, and I'm meeting him again over the next few days, and he's very interested in the concepts that I'm promoting. And so I really see Nepal as a country that is probably going to lead change by starting and demonstrating that forestry can address climate change here, and hopefully the students that I teach here will go around the world and teach these ideas, and collectively, we're going to be able to address climate change and many other problems.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Laxman, for inviting me here. It's been a great pleasure for me.
Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.